I never stay in one country for a long time. It gets boring. I like to move on, see new places, meet different people. It's a good life, most of the time. When I need money, I get a fruit. In Europe you can pick fruit most of the year. You need to be in the right country at the right time, of course. It's not easy work, but the money's not bad. I like to go south in the winter. Life is easier in the sun, and Northern Europe can get very cold in the winter. Last year, 1989 I was in Venice for October. I did some work in a hotel for 3 weeks, then I began slowly to move south. I always go by train when I can. I like trains. You can walk about on a train, and you meet a lot of people. I left Venice and went on to Trieste. There I got a cheap ticket for the slow train to Sofia, in Bulgaria. This train goes all down through Yugoslavia, and takes a long time. A day and a half. But that didn't matter to me. The train left Trieste at 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning. There weren't many people on it at first, but at Zagreb more people got on. 2 girls went along the corridor, past my carriage. They looked through the door, but they didn't come in. Then an old woman came in, sat down and went to sleep. The 2 girls came back along the corridor and looked into the carriage again. The train left Zagreb and I looked out of the window for about 10 minutes, then I went to sleep too. When I opened my eyes again, the 2 girls were in the carriage. They looked friendly, so I said, "Hello." "Hi," they said. "You're American," I said. "Or Canadian, right?" "American," the taller girl said. She smiled. "And you're 23, your name's Tom Walsh, you've got blue eyes, and your mum lives in Burnham-on-Sea, UK. Right? How did you know all that?" I asked. The second girl laughed. "She looked at your passport. It's in your coat pocket." "Oh. Right. My coat was on the seat next to me." I took my passport out of my pocket and put it back in my bag. "Who are you, then?" I asked. They told me. "Melanie and Carol from Los Angeles, USA." They liked Europe, they said. They knew a lot of places: Britain, Holland, Denmark, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Greece. "I'm going to Bulgaria now," I said. "Tour about a month. Then I'm going south for the winter, Cyprus, or perhaps North Africa." "Oh yes," they said. "We love Bulgaria. Sofia's a great town." "Wonderful. What do you do about money?" I asked. "Well, you know," Carol smiled. "Sometimes we get a little job. This and that. But what about you?" "Yeah, come on," Melanie said. "Tell us about you. Tom Walsh with the blue eyes and the mum in Burnham-on-Sea. What are you doing with your life, hey?" So I told them. They were nice girls. They were older than me, perhaps 27 or 28, but I liked them. We talked and laughed for hours. I told them a lot of stories about my life. Some of the stories were true, some weren't. But the girls laughed, and said I was a great guy. I asked them about Bulgaria, because I didn't know the country. They knew Sofia well, they said. "Hey, Carol," Melanie said. "We're staying in Bela Palanka for a day or 2. But let's go over to Sofia this weekend and meet Tom there. We can meet him on Saturday night at the Hotel Marmara. Yeah, it's a good hotel, Carol told me. Cheap, but good. What do you think, Tom? Great. I said, let's do that. The train was very slow. We got to Belgrade at 6 o'clock in the evening, and a lot of people got off. There were only me and the girls in the carriage then. The guard came and looked at our tickets, and went away again. Carol looked at Melanie. Hey, Mel, she said. Why don't you and Tom go along to the restaurant? I'm not hungry, and I want to sleep for an hour. Food's very expensive on the train, I said. I haven't got much money just now. I'm going to get a job in Sofia. Oh, Tom. Melanie said. Why didn't you tell us? Look, you're a nice guy, right? We're okay for money this week. We can buy you a meal. Of course we can, Carol said. And look, in Sofia, we can take you to the best restaurant in town. It's a great place. We love it. What could I say? I was hungry. They had money, I didn't. So Melanie and I went to the restaurant and had a meal. When we came back, Carol was still alone in the carriage. Melanie put her feet on the seat and went to sleep. At Nice some more people got on the train, and two old men came into our carriage. They looked at Melanie's feet on the seat, and talked in loud voices. Carol laughed, and Melanie opened her eyes and sat up. Are we nearly there? She asked Carol, and looked out of the window. Yeah. About half an hour, I think. Why are you getting off at Bella Palanca? I asked. What are you going to do there? Melanie smiled. Find a cheap hotel, meet people, take a look at the town. You know. Just for a day or two, Carol said. But there's nothing there. Oh well, you never know, Melanie laughed. See you in Sofia, right? On Saturday night. The Hotel Marmara, okay. 8 o'clock, Carol said. Don't forget now. Okay. Great, I said. See you there. The train came into Bella Palanca and stopped. The two girls got off and stood on the platform. They smiled at me through the window. Saturday. 8 o'clock, Melanie shouted. Okay, I called. They couldn't hear me because of the noise in the station. They smiled again, picked up their bags and walked away. Nice girls. I'm going to have a great time in Sofia, I thought. The train left Yugoslavia and crossed into Bulgaria at 2 o'clock in the morning. Then the train stopped at some village. I don't remember the name. I ate an apple and looked out of the window. Suddenly there were a lot of policemen on the train. Everybody in the carriage sat up and began to talk. What's happening? I said in Italian to the old man next to me. I don't know, he said in bad Italian. Perhaps they're looking for somebody. Look. The police are taking some people off the train. Then two policemen came into our carriage, a tall thin one and a short fat one. They looked at everybody carefully. And then they looked at me again. Come with us, please, the fat policeman said in English. What? Me? I said. Why? What's the matter? And bring your bag with you, the tall policeman said. I began to ask a question, but policemen never like questions from young men with long hair. So I stayed quiet, picked up my bag, and went with them. In the station building there were a lot more policemen, and some people from the train. They were all young people, I saw. Some were afraid, some were bored. The police looked in everybody's bags, and then the people went back to the train. 2 policemen took me to a table. "Your passport, please," the fat policeman said, "and open your bag." They looked at my passport and I opened my bag. There was a young policewoman with red hair at the next table. She had a nice face, so I smiled at her and she smiled back. "Ah," the tall policeman said suddenly. All my dirty shirts and clothes were out on the table. The policeman picked up my bag and turned it over. Onto the table, out of my bag, fell packet after packet of US American dollars. Nice, new dollars. $50 notes in big packets. A lot of money. My mouth opened, and stayed open. I couldn't find my voice. I was suddenly a very interesting person, and a lot of police ran up to our table and stood behind me. 50,000. 100,000. 150,000. There's $200,000 here, the tall policeman said. "What an interesting bag, Mr. Tom Walsh." I found my voice again quickly. "But it's not my bag," I shouted. There was a big, happy smile on that policeman's face. "Well," he said, "it's got your name on it. Look." So I looked, and of course there was my name, and yes, of course, it was my bag. So how did $200,000 get into my bag? "You cannot bring US dollars into this country," the fat policeman said. He had very short gray hair and little black eyes. He didn't smile once. "But I didn't bring them," I said quickly. "They're not my dollars. I never saw them before in my life," and there was a lot of noise in the station. I looked out of the window and saw my train. Slowly, it began to move. "Hey! 5!" I shouted. "That's my train." The tall policeman laughed. It was a great day for him. "Oh no," he said. "You're not getting back on that train. You're staying here with us, in our beautiful country." He smiled, happily. So I never got to Sofia on Saturday. I was very unhappy about that. I wanted to have a little talk with Melanie and Carol. Ask them 1 or 2 questions, you know. "You're a nice guy, Tom. See you in Sofia, okay? Take you to the best restaurant in town." "Yeah. Great." And I never got down to Cyprus or North Africa that winter. Oh well, I live and learn. It's not an easy life, in prison. But it's warm in winter, and the food's not bad. And I'm meeting some interesting people. There's a man from Georgia, USSR Boris, his name is. He comes from a place by the Black Sea. He's a great guy. When we get out of here, he and I are going down to Australia. Brisbane perhaps, or Sydney. Get a job on a ship, start a new life. Yeah, next year's going to be okay. The end.
A long time ago, an old man lived in a small village in the mountains, in the middle of China. He had a son that he loved very much. But this son was a student in a city very far from his father's village. And so the old man lived and worked alone. Every day He worked for long hours on his farm. There was always a lot to do there. He was a kind, friendly man, and all the people in the village liked him. They knew that the old farmer needed the help of his son, a strong young man who was not afraid of hard work. But the old farmer never complained. The villagers often came over to the old man's house and told him how sorry they were that his son was not there to help him.
When will your son come back home?
It's bad luck for you to live alone, so far away from your only son,
they said. But the old farmer always replied in the same words.
Bad luck or good luck? Who knows?
One day, the old man's son came back to the village. The people in the village were very happy for the old man, and they all came to his house.
Oh, isn't this good news?
Now that your son has come back, your house will be full of good luck again,
they said. But the old farmer only smiled and replied,
Good luck or bad luck? Who knows?
People knew that the farmer was a man who used few words. They didn't ask him what he meant when he said things like this. Life was hard in the village, and nearly everybody there was poor. But the old farmer and his son were not as poor as some others. They had a horse, and on a farm a horse can do the work of 4 men. But one morning, the farmer's son left the stable door open, and the horse ran away. The son felt terrible.
What have I done? Work on the farm without a horse will be really hard. What will we do now?
He asked his father. And the people of the village again felt sorry for the old farmer and his son.
This is very bad luck,
they all said. But again, the old farmer smiled quietly. He didn't look worried about the horse.
Bad luck or good luck? Who knows?
He said. That afternoon, some people in the village thought that they saw the old man's horse running across the hills near the farm. So that evening, the son went to look for it. After a few hours, he found their horse quietly eating grass next to a wild horse. The son was able to bring both horses back to his father's farm. When the people of the village heard this news, they were very happy for the farmer.
Oh, that's such good news. First, you had one horse.
Then you had no horse.
Now you have 2 horses.
They shouted happily.
Your good luck has come back again.
But the old farmer just smiled his quiet smile and said,
Good luck or bad luck? Who knows?
The son liked the new horse very much, and he decided to tame it.
Be careful, son. You've lived in the city for many years. You don't know very much about taming wild horses,
said the old farmer worriedly.
Don't worry, Father.
I know what I'm doing,
replied the son.
When I've tamed this horse, we'll have 2 horses to help us on the farm, and life will be better.
But the next day, the old man's son fell from the wild horse's back to the ground and broke his leg. Now this was a big problem. A man with a bad leg needs to eat, but cannot work. Once again, the people of the village came to the farmer's house to say how sorry they were.
First, your son was in the city, and there was no one to help you.
Then your son came back to help you.
Now your son has broken his leg, and you must help him. Your bad luck has come back,
they said. Once again, the father smiled quietly and replied,
Bad luck or good luck? Who knows?
Some of the villagers were surprised to hear this. Where was the good luck in breaking your leg? At that time in China, there was a long and terrible war between the east and west of the country. Every week, hundreds of young men died in this war. One day, some soldiers arrived in the village. They were looking for more men to fight with them. All the young men in the village had to become soldiers in the army and leave for the war. Their families cried when they said goodbye. They knew that many of these young men would be dead in a few days. But the soldiers left the old farmer's son behind. What good to an army was a soldier with a bad leg? Now the villagers understood the old farmer's words. They went to see him.
Your son didn't have to go with the soldiers because he broke his leg. It's true that your bad luck changed into good luck, they said, happy that they understood the old farmer's wise words. The old farmer smiled kindly at them. Good luck or bad luck, who knows? He answered.
In her house outside the town, Mrs. Kennedy writes her diary, paints the views from her windows, and finds no comfort in the world. Every week, Charlie Blue delivers a box of groceries to her door, but she never appears. It is now 1 year since the accident. On Thursdays, after the last delivery of the long day, which was to the mad Kennedy woman, Charlie Blue was allowed to keep the van for the night. He could drive home to his mother, proud behind the wheel of the yellow van, waving to any of the boys from his school days he might happen to see in their long gardens, playing with their children or cutting their midsummer grass. The arrangement suited his mother. She would have the dinner ready for him, and then, after watching their favourite TV programme, Coronation Street, together, he would drive her into town to Horan's Hotel for her weekly game of cards. Tommy Horan also owned the grocery store, and she thought he was a great man, a generous man, to let her son have the van so that she could get to her game of cards. Charlie said nothing, but knew Tommy Horan to be a bit of a bollocks, selling his tired vegetables and soft tomatoes and eggs that were no longer fresh. He said nothing, because his mother could become as nasty as her 12-year-old dog, which she allowed to sit on her knees while she fed it with the better bits of meat from her dinner plate. There was a light shower of rain as Charlie was driving to Mrs. Kennedy's. The sun appeared strongly again from behind the clouds. The road shone blackly, and the smells of fresh-cut grass and warm earth rose from the fields and came in through the open window of the van. With one hand, Charlie took out a cigarette from a packet and lit it with his Horan's Hotel cigarette lighter. He felt lucky. Lucky to have his driver's license, lucky to have his mother still alive, lucky to be working for Tommy Horan, even if he was an old bollocks. August 20th. A month already. A day just as lovely as that day. The clouds low over the hills. Light seed balls blowing across the land like a first snow. And I hate this beauty because Bobby cannot see it. I paint it, but I hate it. With their sharp wings the birds could open the sky, and I am delighted to see it bleed. From my window I can see the gate and the red wallflowers staining the stones with their blood. At night the screams of hunted animals comfort me. I'm not the only one in pain. In the morning I cannot bear to dress, and prefer to wear only shadows. I go to each of my 15 windows and decide which view to paint today. I might eat, if my body lets me, and then I move to my chosen window and start to paint. Charlie drove carefully around the last bend before the Kennedy house. It was a year to the day, he realized, since poor old Foley lost control of his tractor on this very bend and killed Mrs. Kennedy's young son. Bobby was his name, only 4 or 5 years of age. He and his mother were planting flowers at the foot of the big stone pillars either side of the gate when around the corner came Foley, shouting about the brakes. The front of the tractor was already too close to the pillar on the left, throwing up grass and earth into the sky. Mickey Toohey, who saw the whole thing from his field above the road, told the police in detail what happened. His story earned him free beer in the pub for a long time afterwards. He said the screams of the mother nearly stopped his heart. She picked up the boy's body before Toohey could get there, and she ran all the way up the long driveway to the big house, screaming the whole time as the boy's head dropped lifelessly against her arm and shoulder. Poor old Foley sat on the grass and put his head in his hands and didn't even recognize Toohey when he reached him. Toohey said Foley shouldn't have been allowed on the road, not even on a bike, because the old boy was half blind. September 3rd. Horan's got somebody new to deliver the groceries. I recognized him, Charles Cullen. He knocked and stood at the door and stared out for a long time. Out beyond the fields. At what? I don't know. He stretched his arms out wide like Christ on the cross, to take the whole world to his heart, perhaps. Then he yawned and knocked again. He lifted his t-shirt and scratched his stomach. With his toe, he pushed the box nearer the wall and left slowly, looking back occasionally at the door. While I was emptying the box afterwards, I discovered a box of chocolates I hadn't asked for. I must remember not to pay for that. Now, at the end of summer, the land is bled dry and colours are slowly returning to brown. The cooler air moves against my skin like long grass. When the night enters the house, I look for Bobby. I want to run a bath and pour warm water over his small, smooth back. I want to turn back his soft sheet and lift him into bed and bring the edge of the sheet to his chin. I want to kiss his eyelids as he sleeps. Instead, the darkness tears at my own. Once, last autumn, as darkness was falling, Charlie saw an owl standing on the right pillar of Mrs. Kennedy's gate. It didn't move as Charlie edged the van past the ruined left pillar and wall, and then past the gate still on its side since the accident. At first, he thought it was a shadow. He had stopped by the pillar and quietly rolled down the window when the top of the fat, dark shape turned towards him. From the centre of two wide circles, two eyes stared evenly at him, daring him to move. And then, with 2 or 3 movements of its surprisingly wide wings, it slowly, coldly flew off low over the field towards the trees. Charlie remembered feeling uncomfortable, judged in some way. October 9th. Charles still brings the groceries. For the same reason, I both hate and love him being at my door each week. He reminds me of a better life. I so clearly remember Charles in my class, tall and clumsy at his desk. I had to let him stand in the end. He was freer that way. And the day I decided he had a gift, it comes back so clearly. I hate the way I can remember every detail of my life before Bobby and Bobby's death. He brought his finished painting up to my desk, and at first I was disappointed. A beach in summer, it was called, but everything in Charles's painting was a different shade of blue. Not just the sea, blue sand, blue hills, blue boat, and what I thought was a blue sun. I asked Charles why he hadn't used other colours, and he said in that frightened way he had, "Well, miss, it's a beach at night time, you see." Charlie Blue, they called him after that. Maybe he still paints. I hope so. When the police arrived, Mrs. Kennedy wouldn't let them into the house, too, he said, nor the priest either. In the end, the police had to break a window and get in that way. They found her upstairs washing the child in the bath. The blood-stained water went everywhere, over the walls and the mirror, wetting the priest and the doctor as they forced the dead boy out of her arms. Dr. Murphy phoned his wife, who came over and stayed in the house. Mrs. Kennedy didn't come out of the bathroom until the next morning. She came downstairs, still covered in blood, and told Mrs. Murphy to kindly leave her house. hasn't been seen outside her house and garden since the child was buried. From the high field, Tui says he sometimes sees her sitting all day at one of her windows, or walking naked to the woodpile, or throwing bits of food out for her cats. As Charlie drove the van up the driveway, he looked around for her, as he always did. He threw the end of his cigarette out of the window, thinking to himself that he had only 2 cigarettes left, and that the old bollocks wouldn't be paying him until tomorrow evening. He'd better save them. He looked up at the high field behind Mrs. Kennedy's and guessed that Tui was probably spending a lot more time up there than he needed to. December 25th. I found a Christmas cake I hadn't ordered in the box of groceries yesterday. Sometimes a man comes to the gate and stands there, staring up at the house. Who is he? I wonder. He was there last week, and again today. I feel Bobby's presence strongly today. I fetched the Christmas tree from the cellar and put it in the front room, with coloured lights and pretty glass balls on it. I write in its red and blue and green light. I have wrapped his favourite toys and placed them under the tree. I close my eyes, and he is there, lying on the carpet by the tree, opening his presents, turning his blonde head around to smile up at me, not minding a bit that they're the same presents as last year. I drink my wine and eat a piece of Christmas cake. Too rich for you, Bobby. Too rich. Charlie couldn't imagine his former art teacher naked. Every other woman in town had spent time naked in his dreams, even Mrs. Simpson in the post office. Mrs. Kennedy was older than her, but not by a million years. She could only be 40 or so, and she had had a good shape back then, during his time at school, even if it was hidden by long dresses and colourful baggy jackets. He had liked her. She hadn't laughed at him for being stupid. She had put up a painting he had done of a beach at night time, right up beside the board where everybody could see it. That was good. It was worth being called Charlie Blue for that. February 18th. This week Charlie hid a couple of oranges in the box. I love him for these small presents, the only kisses I receive. Today the stranger walked up the driveway to the door. I saw him clearly through the glass, tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, serious. He just stood there for a long time, unmoving. One of the cats scratched at the kitchen window, and I looked away for a moment. When I looked back, he was gone. Snow fell again today, but a hard sun drove it into the hungry grass. Charlie felt sorry for the thin, grey mother cat. She came up to him as he pulled back the side door of the van. He reached down to scratch her head, and she replied by rubbing her whole body against the leg of his jeans. "It's not much of a life for you," Charlie said. "Not like you used to have, anyway." He was halfway to the front door when he saw last week's box exactly where he had left it. A busy line of black ants led from the box to a hole in the front wall of the house. Confused, he walked up and down for a while, looking at the front door and windows. He put the box he was carrying back into the van, lifted his t-shirt and scratched his stomach. Near the corner of the house, he saw a torn egg box and a pile of clean chicken bones. April 28th. I feel so heavy. As the world outside grows lighter and fills with hope, I become heavier. My paintings are still in winter, almost colorless. I paint from one window now, from Bobby's room, which gives the best view of the gate. My handsome stranger is making good progress. He began by laying out the stones in rows and writing numbers on them. Sometimes he stood up and looked back up at me, serious as always. His blonde hair not quite visible from where I sit. The wall is finished. All that remains are the pillar and the gate. Charlie smoked a cigarette, then knocked on the door for the first time since he began deliveries to Mrs. Kennedy nearly a year before. Just leave the box by the door, and she'll bring the groceries in herself, Horan had said. But Charlie couldn't just drop the new box down beside the old one and let the ants run all over it. When he knocked, the door opened. It hadn't been properly shut. "Mrs. Kennedy," he called into the shadowy hall. May 21st. Charlie still leaves his small offerings. Yesterday it was a packet of sweets. I cannot eat them, but I feel grateful, and that feeds me. I heard the owl call again last night, closer this time. In my head, I could see his long brown body diving from the sky, the terrified movements of the small animal he caught, the slow beat of his wings as he rose into the nighttime trees. The pillar is almost finished. The gate lies on its side on the grass, ready to be put back in place. Charlie felt cold. These thick-walled country houses were impossible to heat from a single wood fire anyway. His eyes got used to the darkness. "Mrs. Kennedy!" he called again. He went into the front room. There was a painting she had been working on and others standing against a wall which was papered in a flower pattern. An untidy pile of silver knives and forks on the carpet. He closed the door and moved towards the back of the house, where the kitchen was, he supposed. This door was open. He switched on the light. There was a fridge in the corner, still working. 3 bananas blackened in a glass bowl. He could see that rats had been here. They had eaten into the bread and butter, and there were even tooth marks in a piece of pink soap in a dish. Charlie went back out into the hall and stood at the bottom of the stairs. He felt colder than ever. "Mrs. Kennedy!" he called, and started up the stairs. June 20th. The days are like children, unwilling to come in from their play, and tonight the sky is a gentle purple, as smooth and as tight as the skin of an aubergine. I have washed all my brushes for the last time. Each one left its own history of colour on my hands. I emptied the wooden knife and fork box and put them into it, along with all my paints. My present to you, Charlie Blue. Tomorrow I will walk through the gate. The smell of paint cleaner hangs in the air. While Charlie waited for O'Reilly, the policeman, and Dr. Murphy to finish inside, he smoked his last cigarette, leaning against the side of the van, looking out over the trees to the distant, darkening hills. A yellow light came from the open doorway and upstairs window of the house. He had just finished his cigarette when O'Reilly came out and handed him a small wooden box, told him to go on home, that the ambulance could take over an hour to get there from Ballinasloe, and that there was no point in waiting. O'Reilly would see him tomorrow. Ambulances never hurry for the already dead. Charlie drove back into town and parked outside Horan's Hotel. The bollocks could keep his van. Through the hotel window, he could see his mother at her card game, the dog at her feet. She must have asked a neighbour to bring her into town. The dog sensed his presence, looked out, but did not move. He reached into the van and took out Mrs. Kennedy's box of brushes and paints from the passenger seat. Shutting the door with his shoulder, he put her present under his arm and walked on, out past the last lights of the town, and into the blue shadows of the moonlit countryside, feeling nervous but welcomed, like a stranger at home, in what was once a foreign land.